Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. We're back. Access to Democracy is back, and Coleen Rowley is back, who is a favorite and long-time guest now, really. You've been coming here for quite a few years.
Yeah.
Coleen Rowley, whose name is really a household word, who probably was not known for her 24 years in the FBI, but certainly became known when she became Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2002, and is really highly sought after for speaking engagements, a social activist, a protector of civil rights and individual rights, and welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure. Now, today's New York Times had a front page article on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and it pointed out that 11 of the 12 judges have been appointed by Chief Justice Roberts, that they are all Republicans, all conservative Republicans. 6 of them actually worked in other administrations. Is it any surprise that anything that goes before them is okayed, that of thousands of applications for surveillance, they're all getting okayed? I think 4 out of 4,000 or something like that were turned down.
Right. Well, of course, that's been the constant criticism, is that in secrecy, and there's no ability to make it's ex parte, so no one is able to make the opposite argument, that it's basically a rubber stamp. I will say before 9/11, there were problems with the wall, the sharing of intelligence with criminal matters, and that is actually the reason why the case here in Minnesota did not go forward. There was a career risk aversion in the FBI of even taking a case to the FISA court. The applications for court orders and to monitor and to search have at least doubled since 9/11, and they quickly doubled. So you not only you have the rubber stamping, was around 900 before 9/11 per year, and that went up to 1,800 or so. So it's a large number, and that doesn't even tell you everything, because one order can actually encompass a lot of different locations. And as you see with this court order in the FISA court for the massive telephone, that's everyone's telephone toll data. So it's not just one piece of information.
Well, all our communications apparently are being spied upon now. We have drones that are flying around. I was going to say floating around, but flying around. We have cell phones that are monitoring where we go. Where is the privacy?
GPS systems. Well, privacy is what they say has to be sacrificed for security, and that is kind of the myth, or what you want to call the propaganda. I call it a utilitarian proposition that is being put to the people, that if you want security, you're going to have to go along with giving up privacy. It's actually worse than that, because we're all walking through those monitors into the airports, or they photograph our body cavities, and you can't give up more privacy than that. It's worse than that for democracy, though, and the title of your show, Access to Democracy, is important because we have the founding fathers who understood that the checks and balances between the courts and the legislative and the executive power, and then the fourth estate, the freedom of press, which is embodied in the First Amendment. We are now looking, and it's right on the line of losing the First Amendment. And that would be freedom of the press. How are we going to learn about these things?
And losing the Fourth Amendment as well.
That's right.
Searches and seizures.
And Fifth Amendment due process. But I'm focused right now on the First Amendment because that's where you see the whistleblowers with Edward Snowden who are telling, finally telling what's going on, and then the administration overreacting and using these draconian prosecutions under the Espionage Act as a aider and abetter of the enemy, and then applying that to journalists, starting to apply that even to journalists.
There's a New York Times journalist who is being threatened right now with jail for not disclosing a source.
Right.
And one of the things that's always been sacrosanct in this democracy is that the press, the freedom of the press, really, so much depends on it. A journalist should not be expected to disclose a source.
Well, the court just held that there's no reporter's privilege, and that reporter is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter. There's not that many good reporters right now. Actually, a lot of them have either done the easy thing or become intimidated. But the handful that are left, people like Jane Mayer that outed the black sites and the torture, Dana Priest at the Washington Post, James Risen
Dana Priest, right,
at the New York Times. I mean, they are the ones actually that this surveillance. We are just common citizens. And so basically our info is just going into the storage of those massive computer systems. The interesting individuals are the reporters, because that is what the administration sees as the danger of getting out these so-called secrets. There's one thing I just got to jump in right here. It's the opposite. People believe that the secrecy is protecting them. If you go back to before 9/11 and you actually look at the inquiries, my memo led to an Inspector General inquiry, but there's the 9/11 Commission, there's
and
the
we're
Judiciary.
talking about the memo that you wrote to the FBI,
Right.
which was ignored, which might have had an effect on 9/11.
Well, my memo actually, when it came to light, wasn't ignored. It led to this Inspector General investigation that went on for 2 years.
It came to light after
Right.
your superiors ignored it in the FBI.
Well, the superiors ignored the request for the FISA Court of the agents before 9/11. And there was a compartmentalization, there was extreme secrecy. This is exactly the opposite of what we're being told. We're being told secrecy protects us. What if the American public had known that Ashcroft, in arguing with the head of the FBI in July of 2001, had said, "I don't want to ever hear about terrorism"? That's actually in the 9/11 Commission. These are the types of secrets that this secrecy is protecting. And then you find out that memos were not even read in the FBI that were said Osama bin Laden heavily entwined with the Chechen terrorists. They're going to attack. That went to our FBI Director Louis Freeh and 8 of his assistants. They claim they never read the memo. So this flood of intelligence, and some of these pieces of intelligence were very important, that came in before 9/11. Can you imagine what it is now when they have started the massive top secret America, and then it's all covered with secrecy?
Don't we have almost 500,000 people who are in surveillance, who have top secret clearance? Do we need 500,000 people spying on us in effect?
It's a little higher than 500,000. The Washington Post in 2010 counted nearly 1 million. The last figure I've heard of people with just clearances, which could be top secret or something less, 4.5 million. You're talking 1,200 public agencies. There's the top 16, CIA, NSA, FBI, but there's also 1,200 more public ones. Some of them are small. Then there's 1,900 private contractors.
And that really scares me more than anything, because who are these people? Who are these contractors? How are they vetted? How do we know really what their backgrounds are? They're not. We're relying on what the contractor says. And that's a
they're in it for
very
profit.
dangerous
Right, and
precedent.
then it goes back to Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex. There's a whole new national security surveillance complex, and those 1,900 are in it for the money. They're in it to make profits, and of course this higher technology with drone surveillance and the computer storage and all this digital collection, GPS tracking. So the common citizen right now is not doing well. The courts are not allowing the ACLU lawsuits to even be heard. They're dismissing the lawsuits based on technical reasons like lack of standing or state secrets privilege. There's a couple of things, but they're not even hearing them on the merits right now. So this is really a telling sign that our checks and balances are way out of whack. When our
and
courts
it really
can't even
threatens the very foundations of our democracy. Now, we had 8 years of George W. Bush. I was not disappointed in George W. Bush because I expected nothing good to come from that administration, and it didn't. I expected him to go to the right. I expected him to trample civil liberties, but we have moved now to Obama, and I am terribly disappointed in the fact that Obama seems to have perpetuated what Bush did. He put Eric Holder in charge of the Justice Department, who I think, if not a complete failure, certainly is close to it. He hasn't prosecuted who should be prosecuted. He finally did something today at somebody's urging about the state of Texas and voting rights, but that's another thing that's being taken away from the people, and the Justice Department pretty much has sat on its hands also.
Well, Obama had a carryover from the Bush administration. He used John Brennan, who was one of the main figures involved with the black sites and the kidnappings and the CIA renditions, and then John Brennan became the drone assassination czar under Obama. Obama did a real good job in his campaign of speaking truth to power. He claimed he wanted to protect whistleblowers. He voted actually against, I'm trying to think, he had some key votes. He did vote for the NSA's monitoring. I know he finally capitulated on this, but he did vote against a couple of key moments when he was still a senator. Okay, he gets into power, and I think it's just the switcheroo.
And he's become a corporatist.
Right, and it's a vested interest because all of the money and the power is on this side. And I think that our next president, I don't care what party, will probably be worse. Because until we can fix the underlying problems in this corruption of the military-industrial national security surveillance, we have some hope right now. There was a vote 2 days ago, and it was only 12 votes shy of at least fixing part of that NSA, which shows you that when there's the media, put the story out and the people read the story, at least there was some impetus for a while.
But the media has been so weak. I mean, you talked about 3 investigative journalists. To get good investigative journalists today, we certainly can't rely on the big sources. The networks, forget about it. Most of the newspapers, forget about it. We're certainly not going to go to Fox for investigative journalism, or MSNBC, although they do have a couple of people there with courage and backbone. But still, it's magazines and it's small vehicles that seem to be doing the grunt work that's enabling us to find some of these things out. And a danger to themselves also.
Yeah, that's correct. And again, it's the sponsorship of the news, and I'm sure that's a big factor. I think there is hope, though, that maybe with this last threat, for instance, of Verizon, that maybe, for instance, the New York Times understands now what is on the line. This is actually now freedom of the press that is on the line. And at that point, they might become stronger and finally see that this is something that they have to encourage. The writers will do it if their bosses will let them and will encourage them. So it kind of goes all the way to the top. And we have to hope we can get a press back. There's alternative press and whatever, and you have to read unbelievable amount in order to finally kind of put it all together to really understand as a critical thinker what's going on.
Yeah, you can't pick up the newspaper. I remember when I was a kid, we had in New York, we had about 10 daily papers. We're down to, what, 2? 3, the Post, which is not certainly a vehicle for journalism, the Daily News, same thing, and the New York Times. You have to go elsewhere, and the Times, which had backbone, certainly has seen readership falling, and that affects the bottom line, and then the pressure gets put on.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, you had an article in the New York Times just a few days ago, questions for the new FBI director.
Right.
In his nomination hearings, and you had 10 points that you wanted him to be asked by Congress, and we'll see if anybody has the courage to ask them. But
Well, they had a 2.5-hour hearing, and there were quite a few that asked the questions about his authorization of waterboarding. And they forced James Comey, who will probably be, they haven't had the full vote yet, but he's been voted out of committee. He had to admit, unlike Mukasey, that waterboarding is torture. Then Senator Franken went even a step further. I think Senator Franken actually did one of the better jobs of questioning, and he went a step further and read the whole gory, gruesome description of sleep deprivation. People think, oh, missing a couple hours of sleep. No. It's being shackled to the floor, your arms shackled to the ceiling, you get this much room, small amount of room, you have to wear a diaper, and it's for up to 180 hours, 7.5 days. And when he read that, he turned to Comey and he says, isn't that torture? And he forced Comey then to admit also that sleep deprivation is torture. So while he admitted those things, he could not really explain why he had signed off on them. And he had signed off on these harsh, so-called enhanced interrogation tactics in 2005, right before he left. He had also signed off on the warrantless monitoring.
that's one that really concerned me also.
And he had actually signed off on, what's the other one? There was a third one that he signed off on.
Use of drones?
No, that was just starting. I mean, I'm sure he went along with it too. But the warrantless monitoring, people had a misunderstanding because they knew the story of him in the hospital room with Ashcroft, very sick, and Bush sending his men there to get Ashcroft.
That was his moment of glory.
Well, they, and the media played it up, and they made it very dramatic, as if he had stood up to Bush. Well, there was a lot more to that story. The very next morning after the hospital room scene, Bush called him in, Comey, and there's a private conversation that he refuses to talk about. Bush also called in Robert Mueller. He talked to them separately. And somehow that warrantless monitoring continued. Bush, first of all, continued it without Ashcroft's signature. And it's my kind of reading between the lines and deducing that what they were really arguing about at the time was the rationale for the monitoring. Bush, under John Yoo, had him compartmentalized, and he had this idea of expanded, inherent executive power.
Well, John Yoo was the fellow who authorized just about anything in terms of torture.
Right, and he was working with, I think, Cheney's Addington. They were working together with people in the administration, and it was very tightly held. There were times when even, for instance, the NSA legal counsel was not privy to what John Yoo was writing. So this was, you talk about secrecy, this wasn't secrecy from the citizens, it was even secrecy inside of the Office of Legal Counsel.
Well, we have so many different aspects or departments or areas of government that one does not necessarily know what the other is doing.
Well, this was deliberately, this was not an accident. When the NSA's monitoring authority is expanded overnight, as it was after 9/11, and the NSA legal counsel is not even cut into it, that was deliberate. And that was because they were doing these things under these novel theories of inherent executive power. What happened is this Goldsmith came in 2003 or 4, and he started to look then at some of those prior theories. One was the torture memo that John Yoo had written, but then also the NSA, and then he started to question. And what they did, though, is I think they switched the legal theory to now being justified by the authorization to use military force.
How does somebody become a member of the NSA?
Well, probably
Do they
similar.
recruit them now? I mean, they recruit FBI agents, they recruit CIA agents, but I've never read anything about the recruitment of NSA.
Well, I know
the
one way.
The most secretive agency.
Keith Alexander, who is the current head of the NSA, and he's also a 4-star general. He's also the cyber war commander. He's actually been to hackers conferences. He wore blue jeans, and he was one of the keynotes for one of these hacker things. And he's actually going there to recruit people to join because they need people with computer skills. And so where are you going to get computer skills?
Thank you, Edward Snowden.
Well, Edward Snowden wasn't, he actually joined out of the military, you know, so they FBI, CIA, they get people, I think, from all different walks of life, and they need different skills. The NSA needs math. They have a certain skill set. They need mathematics, and they need computer, high-tech engineering type
Josh,
skills.
I hope you're listening in the control room. Josh is a computer whiz.
Oh, the CIA, for instance, have 2 types of people they're recruiting. They recruit very smart professor types for their intelligence analysts. And then they recruit for their operatives, the more reckless, what you think of James Bond types, the daredevil types.
And then we have people who are recruited for their intelligence who get pushed too far, as you were, and who have to come out and then get skewered by the administration, by the people that you worked for doing what the conscience should tell you to do in the first place.
You know, I think I had a unique career because when I joined, it was just 2 years after the FISA law had gone into effect. And I actually had some retiring agents. They had gone through the COINTELPRO under Hoover. And in fact, one guy, his supervisor had been indicted or had gotten into trouble with all of the black bag jobs and the monitoring of Martin Luther King, and they went after Black Panthers, even feminists. Well, a lot of them went along with it, of course, because they were, collecting salaries and it was easy work. But I got warned, actually, when I first joined the FBI, that this was dumb and never to go do that again. Then I taught constitutional law in the FBI for 13 years. If you knew how I focused, it wasn't just me, there were 56 offices and we were all doing this, focusing on the technicalities of the Miranda rights. Okay, now we're talking not even having due process. You don't even get your day in court. You don't even get charged. I just remember the third thing with Comey. Indefinite detention. He was the spokesperson for the Padilla case, an American citizen held over 3 years in a brig without even being charged, no defense
Without
counsel.
counsel.
Exactly.
Without contact with family.
Right. Franken, again, Senator Franken hammered him on that, and he did a really good job. And he still defends this. He says this is necessary. Now,
Al Franken has really become one of the strongest voices in the Senate. There aren't too many. Would that we still had some people who have been in the past who were not afraid to speak up. But Franken, Bernie Sanders is another one, but there aren't too many.
No, and when push comes to shove on these votes, it's just kind of, on the NDAA there were 14. Franken was one of the 14, but then in the final analysis they all voted to let it happen. And they need to keep pushing. Right now there's a moment because of the public has learned that we're supposed to be the enemy. We're considered the potential enemy. You're spying on us, American citizens. You're saying you can put us into indefinite detention. The lawsuit that was just dismissed was one challenging indefinite detention of Americans. The filibuster that Rand Paul had was on drone bombing of American citizens.
Well, even Rand Paul can do something right once in a while.
But when we realize it's us and not just some enemy in a faraway country, I think that there is a chance now for these things to finally be rectified and changed.
Do we have the right to order a drone kill on an American citizen? We did that on an alleged quote-unquote terrorist, and he probably was a terrorist, but we also took out a 16-year-old son, collateral damage. It just frightens me as to how far we can go and get away with this.
I've read the white paper several times, and in fact in John Brennan's confirmation, it's on the record. We submitted, 50, 60 questions for John Brennan based on the drone assassination policy in that white paper. It does not hold water. I have talked to some law professors now. Unfortunately, some law professors are going along with it. But, you know, you cannot, without due process.
Well, see also Barack Obama, who was a constitutional law professor. And
The idea that the world is a battle place, you don't have to declare war on a given country or say that that country is a, you know, a nation state that you're at war with. You say that the whole world is a battlefield and that we're just picking people off all over. I mean, that theory is incredible. It's out of science fiction, but that is what is in the white paper.
it's out of science fiction, but, you know, if you see a drone overhead, you wonder if it's for you.
That's right. The imminent threat, imminent has been redefined to mean that if you think that will eventually happen. There's no human ability to predict what is a threat. I mean, if somebody's shooting at you, yes, you know they're a threat. But to say that this person sleeping in bed right now, next week is going to be a threat to me, so I get to kill him now, that's incredible. And it's,
Well, Minority Report.
that's what it is.
Really, the movie is then personified in life, and it's pretty scary.
There's another thing I've written about with respect to of course, the New York Times one was about James Comey's confirmation, and the CNN I wrote about.
CNN, massive spying on Americans is outrageous.
Right, that's
another recent one that you...
Right, and then the third one I wrote about over 2 years ago when it was first announced was the Insider Threat Program. So the very first, I mean, this was after WikiLeaks and Bradley Manning, OMB put out guidance that inside the government you were to be spying on your co-workers and try to tell who would be the disgruntled employee who could become a leaker. And there's now a formal program set up. There are every agency has a kind of an internal affairs called the Insider Threat Program. What does this remind you of, by the way? Does this remind you of
1984, Big
right.
Brother.
And what we used to hear about the Soviet Union and the Bloc and the Stasi. There's no way. If you think about it, the people who are submitting suggestions for improvement, I actually submitted suggestions from time to time. We had something called the suggestion program. Well, they're going to be targeted now as if they are the disgruntled employees that will become a leaker or a traitor.
So people will be afraid to make
Yep.
suggestions to improve systems
That's right.
that will help
That's
make us a
exactly.
better country.
And when we had true spies in the 80s, we had, I mean, for one, Robert Hansen in the FBI, he went like 20 years spying, and he was actually giving up double agents that were getting murdered. They knew there was an FBI spy. They targeted lots of other people except for Robert Hansen. In fact, Robert Hansen was put in charge of the task force to look for the spy in the FBI.
And he was the spy.
And he was
And
the
then
spy.
we have the other side of the coin with Cheney, who really, I believe, was the brain behind the Bush administration, taking a legitimate spy, somebody who had done a lot of things, Valerie Plame, to help this country, to bring this country back to where it was, and he outs her so that
Right.
it ends her career. Now, I know that Cheney was not prosecuted for it, but
And Scooter Libby got
and I'm going to be
pardoned.
prosecuted by the control room because we already ran through a half an hour so fast, and we have so much more to talk about.
Well, we need citizens to get talking about these things. Get letter writing, write op-eds, and educate your fellow citizens.
Coleen Rowley, always a pleasure to sit and chat with you, and we have to do it more often than once a year, which is about what we have been doing, but we have to. And,
Well, let's hope the next time we get together we can talk about good news.
you are Access to Democracy. Thank you.
Thank you.